we're hoping that there'll be lots of opportunity for you to talk to each other and also come up with what you want to know out of today, and then we'll hit the full panel and see if they can answer. But for now, I just want to kick it off with each of the panel members just saying a little bit about what they do and from their own experience, if that's okay. I'm just going to ask people to introduce themselves so that I don't get it wrong.
Hello, I'm Trisha. I am currently working with Manchester International Festival as an apprentice producer, but I'm not actually going to talk to you about that today. I'm going to talk to you about working with the Larks, who are a company that use playfulness and interactivity in theatre contexts. So we do lots of different kinds of work. Some of that work tours and isn't specific to certain locations, and other work is cited, so I'll tell you a bit more about that.
I'm Jack. I'm from the Manchester International Festival. I'm their technical director and member of the full-time team at the Manchester International Festival, and I oversee all of the aspects of the festival that actually manifest themselves into reality.
I'm Chrissy. I'm a deviser and performer based in Manchester. I currently work solo, but I have a company as well called Escape, and I lecture in contemporary theatre and performance at New Crown in Preston.
I'm Rob. I'm one of the directors of Culturepedia. We're a project management company based in Lancashire. We programme and commission lots of work for rural touring. We have another project called Plugged In, which is about community programming of small local authority venues, and we do lots of other sorts of stuff like that. We also have a project called Somewhere Too, so if any of you are under 25 and want help finding space to do work in, we can help.
Great. So what I've asked each person to do at the beginning is just have a very short piece of time to fit their entire knowledge and experience into, but just say a little bit about the different projects, but specifically pick out one project that they can talk about, particularly around what specific challenges there were in that and maybe how you get around it. I hope that's okay. Yeah. We're going to start with Trisha.
Very important that I start my slide.
Yes.
I'm going to do that. So I'm going to talk to you today about a project called The Aftermath. The Larks work in different ways. We sometimes make our own work, and we get commissioned by theatres, and then we'll go to Arts Council in England to top up the rest of that fund. But in this instance, we were commissioned by a private project. So in some ways, this is a bit of a tricky example because it wasn't the most audience-focused project that we would do. The aim of this project was to provide a proof of concept to Film 4 to demonstrate what multi-platform storytelling might look like if it included a live event. So this is an area that lots of TV companies and film companies have been exploring. So our proof of concept it's basically, I think in the arts we refer to it more as an R&D or a research and development project. Our proof of concept was in response to a brief for a film, which I'm not allowed to talk about. I'm just not a document. So I'll just refer to it as Script X. But Script X, I can tell you, was set in a post-apocalyptic landscape. And we were quite drawn to it because we'd done a previous project called The Apocalypse, and the apocalypse took place at a time when the financial crisis had occurred. There was a sense of institutions failing people and people rising up. And we were quite interested in that as a metaphor for what was going on in the real world. So The Aftermath attracted us because this was a year later, it was the end of 2012, and we felt like it was a time when we were in this weird, purgatory sort of state where we sort of didn't really know. The Olympics had been amazing, but what impact did that have for us, and where were we going? And I kind of still feel like we're in that weird post-apocalypse now, in some ways politically and socially. So we were quite drawn to it as a narrative. So our proof of concept was a immersive chase game. It only had 50 people because we, as I said, it wasn't, the aim of the project wasn't about the audience, it was about delivering a film, effectively, a piece of documentation to film for. So in that way, I think we took more risks than we would have done normally, and I'll talk about those. Also, I just want to say, where's my slideshow?
Shall I stand here and click it when it's time to
Is that okay?
Yes.
Technology.
No. I just want to say, because we did take quite a few risks in this project, this isn't necessarily the best way to do things, or the right way or the wrong way, it's just the way I did it. So I'll try and say when there were challenges which maybe we would approach differently next time. We wanted to do a chase game because we wanted something that was quite exciting. We felt like Film 4 would go for that. And we decided to do it in Ancoats because we felt like, in terms of practicalities, whilst we would let the police and the council know what we were doing, it wouldn't impact on the city in the same way as if we were doing it in Market Street. So that was quite important to us. But we also felt like Ancoats is a really important part of Manchester, and we wanted Manchester to be at the centre of this story. So players had a character at a start point, and then who had a dilemma and needed the audience's help, and then they have to visit a series of locations, other characters, and complete challenges. And in between those points, they're being chased, pursued, watched by an evil force. So I wanted to talk about this one because we were working in really challenging spaces, disused spaces, dilapidated spaces, and there was a big lack of infrastructure. So there's a couple of spaces that do host public events. So Hope Mill and Crack, for example, those are spaces that do have audiences regularly. But even in Hope Mill, in their engine room, there wasn't any mains power. So we're quite used to working without mains power, but we needed some lighting because the whole experience was going to be filmed from the point of view of the participant. So we needed they used a GoPro camera on their heads and a torch on their heads. And as they ran around, they picked up an audio person who, as they ran around, they picked up the experience from the judge, from the point of view of the participant. But whereas normally, I'm not sure, we probably consider lighting as a safety requirement rather than an aesthetic requirement. This time we had to really think about how we were going to light the sets. So our film company, Albino Mosquito, who we were working with, they had a lot of battery-powered lights, so they got those all charged up, and then we took those in, and that provided enough light for us to see the characters, but also sort of see the path through the building. So that was one of the things. There was no heating, but since we were asking people to leg it around town for 2 hours, it really wasn't an issue. I'd probably have to consider that if we were inviting an audience to sit down and experience something for an hour. So I didn't have to think about that this time. There was no running water or toilets, so I identified a venue in the middle of all of the checkpoints and asked them would they be happy to provide water and toilet facilities to participants if they had the armband, if they showed that they were part of the experience. And the landlord of that venue said that's absolutely fine, no problem. So we had that as a rest point, but also somewhere that they could stop legging it around. And so yeah, a rest point as well as somewhere to get a drink and go to the loo. In terms of sending people into spaces that aren't regularly used by audiences, this was quite risky, we won't lie to you. What we did was manage those risks. I don't think we could ever say that those buildings were safe, but what we can do is manage how participants use those buildings, if they use them at all. So I'll talk about some of the ways we did that. We sent a risk assessment and an event plan to Greater Manchester Police and the Council. We aimed to send it about 3 weeks in advance. I think we sent it 2 weeks in advance by the time we had the locations confirmed, and that gives us 14 days. The police come back to us and say, absolutely not, or no, you can't work in there, or that's a really bad idea. So, also, one of the venues I felt like the owner of that venue, the landlord of that venue, was quite dodgy. And I thought if I could just say to the police, this is the venue we're going to visit, we're not going to go in, we're going to use the exterior. If I said that to police and they said, absolutely not, stay away from him, then I would have reconsidered it. But they didn't, and there was an aesthetic decision to use that venue. I wouldn't send general public audiences into this experience. So this was a select audience by invitation only, people who'd played our games before, people who'd been to our events before and had a really good understanding of what would be expected from them as audience members. So they were going to be running around. They, there might not be a toilet at every location, or there weren't any, and they'd be expected to take responsibility for themselves. So I wouldn't invite a general audience to this. I wouldn't sell tickets to it because it was quite a different type of event from what we would do if we were raising money from the arts council. So I think that allowed us to take more risks. They sign a disclaimer before they participate, and there's absolutely no one in the teams that can take part as well. So the disclaimer says that they have to take responsibility for their own actions and take care of other people as much as they can, and we don't give them the wristband or allow them to participate if they don't sign that. We also do like a very thorough safety briefing at the beginning to tell them, please be aware of your surroundings, please don't run into the box, please, if you fall over, here's a number to call, here's someone who's a first aider, all that sort of stuff.
Can I break your concentration a second? What can you hear? Because, sorry, we didn't know this noise was going to be going on. Are you able to hear at the back? Okay, sorry about that. Not much more.
It's got the tiny bit.
Tiny bit?
Tiny bit louder.
Okay. We also had stewards in high-vis at every location, so actually as players were approaching a location, they could identify that that was a location within the world. And then that was helpful for us because it meant there was someone that wasn't in character who could say, oh, you lost, here's where you are on the map, oh, here's the toilets, if they had any questions or had any problems, and they could all contact me. So the ones that didn't, the venues that don't regularly have audiences in them, one was a completely dilapidated office space, warehouse, factory thing. It's now actually been demolished, so it was trashed. It was really trashed. But the reason we wanted to use it because it was beautifully trashed, and that would come across really nicely on film, and it fit really nicely into the story. So, but we were aware that it was quite risky. So there was quite a lot of some of the architecture of that building really wasn't safe, but we identified a section of the building that had nothing overhead that looked obviously unsafe, and there was quite a lot of furniture and things like that that was unfixed, so we cleared a big space. We made everybody else wait outside, and we just invited one participant to come in. And the reason we invited one rather than the full 5, because they went in round in groups of 5 or 6, was we found that if you invite a small group of 5 or 6, then it's easier to lose someone. So if the actors are really engaging with 4 out of 5 and there's one person who goes, oh, I wonder what this is, then if you've got one person, they're much easier to control, they're much more unlikely to do anything unpredictable. What else? Just stuff, we cleared machinery and equipment out of the way, we cleared trip hazards, we made sure there was enough lighting so people could see where they were going. We discourage running inside. We can never tell people what to do, but we don't chase them inside. That would be mental. And yeah, and just to say, if this project had been audience focused, so if it was about engaging people rather than submitting a film to Channel 4, we wouldn't have used those buildings. I think we would have been asking too much. They weren't accessible. We didn't know that if they were safe. And we'd have to consider, because they were private buildings, we'd have to consider whether there were any licensing issues, and that wasn't an area we wanted to get into. That's it.
You'll have an opportunity to think about questions. If something pops into your head whilst you're listening, just jot it down. But yeah, I'd like to go on to Chrissy if that's possible.
Yes, absolutely. Hello. The work which I traditionally make is based in theatres, based in black box studio theatres, and it's not until the past year that I've started working outside of those spaces. And the reason why this was a response to a call out for a festival to make a piece of work, and I chose to make it as a one-to-one performance and to find a smaller space because it was a one-to-one. So I started making this piece of work called Making Time in cafes. So cafes of theatres or of museums or galleries. And I then realised that I was still predominantly engaging with a theatre audience because they were there for these festivals, or an art audience in museums and galleries. So I experimented with taking the same one-to-one piece to just actual cafes and wondering what that engagement was between myself and a participant who is just genuinely having their lunch on a Tuesday, and would they how does that experience and that encounter change? So this was like the beginnings of thinking about working with different audiences and working in different spaces, which led me to the project that I'm going to talk about in more depth, which is called the Dance Collector. So I began developing these ideas of working with different audiences, and I decided that it would be a good way of collecting material and meeting people and kind of getting stories. So the first thing I did was I hired a market stall on Preston Market so that I could meet people who are genuinely just passing through that market. So either shopping or the market stall traders themselves, to collect stories about dance. And I'm not a dancer, but I'm really interested in dancing because it's how my parents met. My parents met through Polish dancing. So my practice is really interested and concerned with cultural heritage. So I was really interested in collecting these stories, but from genuine, everyday people. So I did this on Preston Market, basically by baking a load of cakes and having them there so that people would have a reason to come over to me, because otherwise I just have a blank table myself. So I asked people, well, people would come over because there's cake, and I would say to them, you can have some cake for free in exchange for a dance move or a story or a memory about dance. And I have a Polish dance costume which I wear, which my mother made, which also is a very focal point, the talking point. So luckily this worked, and people were attracted to the costume or to the cake, and I started collecting these stories and getting this material. And then I was wondering about what other spaces I could kind of go to get material. So I attended some dance classes in Preston, found some classes on the internet and asked if I could go along and engage in the class and then speak to the participants afterwards. And also tea dances. And in doing all of that, I then saw through PANDA a scheme about supporting artists who are interested in working in communities or rural touring. And I started kind of wondering how this project could develop through those routes. And that led me to being mentored with a lady called Jodie, who is based at MMU Crew. And together we have been working for the past 5 weeks with a community in Crewe called Wishing Well in their community centre. It's called the Jubilee Centre. So every Wednesday I have been working with the Over 55s Luncheon Club, where a collection of people meet and they have lunch and they play bingo and they talk to each other. So I have been going in there and talking with them and collecting their stories and memories so that I could then create a piece of theatre to present back to them, which is what I did just this Wednesday gone. So this is about making work for a community centre space. So it's completely new to anything that I've ever done before. I of course tried to predict challenges which would arise. I tried to kind of think through how it would be, and some of the things I predicted happened, and then of course there were lots of things which I didn't foresee that I've learned from the experience. So I'm sure like a common sense thing that you could imagine with working in spaces like community centres is the lack of tech and the lack of theatrical lighting and equipment in that sense. So I had to really think about bringing my own extensions and figuring out like spatially where I could plug things in and arrange the room. But one of the things that I really didn't anticipate was how public the setup of that theatre piece would be, because the volunteers who work in the building, or just people who are in the building, would want to talk with me as I was setting up in the space. So that was quite interesting to kind of be doing that and talking through what this project is, whilst generally trying to like get things straight on the floor and not crooked and playing around with that. I did anticipate that the performance would begin kind of prior to the actual beginning of the show, as in when the audience are coming in. But I didn't really foresee it being as soon as I walked into the building and with the stuff, not able to put it down, and it starts in an hour and I'm still chatting to someone about something. So I thought that was really interesting, and it made me think about how I could make that as more part of the performance, perhaps, how that setup is. Because I was aware that when the audience come in, I would greet them and talk with them, and the performance has already started there, but I think the setup kind of needed addressing. I also, I would be making the show, so I'd meet with these people every Wednesday, collect their stories, go home, collate the material, play around with it, and try to imagine how it would be in the space. But there was lots of things which I needed to consider, like I really wanted to hang a dress as part of the set, and I wasn't sure whether I'd be able to, whether there's something to hang it from. There was in this particular space, I kind of looked around and made sure that could happen. But if I was to now transfer this piece to another community centre, there's not necessarily the ability to just hang things wherever you want to. Because I was working with an age group who were an older generation, I also had to consider the space in terms of accommodating wheelchairs and Zimmer frames for the audience. So that was something to consider. And the space itself as a community centre, I was really conscious that the piece is for these people who I'd been working with. And initially, it was my intention that they would take a trip to the theatre in Crewe to see this piece of performance, which is about them. And I realised very quickly that their mobility wasn't strong enough, and it would be quite disruptive for them to have to come to a theatre to see this piece of work, and that actually I should just bring it to them, to their community centre. I was also really wary of bringing in too many additional people into their space. So we were talking about whether the students who were studying community theatre at MMU would benefit from seeing the piece. And in the end, we decided that it would be too many people to bring into the community space, that it's their space. It's not for me to invite hordes of people so that they are now outnumbered. So what we did instead was we did it in their space, and then in the afternoon I transferred the piece to the studio at the university and did it again for the students, which was a really interesting experiment, because it then went back into a black box theatre. So something that's made for and with a community was then pulled out of context for students just studying that subject. So that was a really interesting experiment. One thing that I did anticipate about working in the community centre was that because it's their space and because it's their stories, that they participated throughout the performance by talking and commenting, correcting me. So if I
I, for example, was telling a story about somebody applying rouge to their cheeks, which they kept at the top of their stockings, and I'd had this kind of set up and prop in this moment, and the front row all just shouted out, "We didn't use a brush, we used our fingers, you've got it wrong." And I was like, in the performance going, okay. But I was absolutely knowing that they were going to participate because, you know, it's for them, it's their piece of work. They're not going to just sit in silence necessarily. I learned that from them early on, that they were very interactive, and that's a fine thing. It was fine because I was prepared for it. So as I was saying lines, they were kind of shouting things out, joining in. If there was a song, people were standing up and kind of demonstrating things and sitting back down, which made for a very lively performance. You know, it was for me very interesting. Completely different to the students at MMU who are expecting to see a piece of theatre and will just sit back and kind of quietly just absorb it. So for me that was really interesting. The main challenges I think that I encountered was working around their schedule and working around their needs. This particular group were really interested in playing bingo as their main activity. And so if it was like a threat to them that their amount of bingo games would be reduced because I wanted them to do something, then that would become a problem. And that's fine, you know, it's not down to me to say, well, I don't want to do this, I want to do something else. So it was absolutely about fitting in with what they wanted to do and making sure that they felt comfortable in that situation, not that I was asking something of them that they didn't get anything in return. Okay, I think I'll stop there because I'm up to time.
Right, before we move on, I'm really, really sorry about noise. If anyone on this side with their ear being plaster drilled, feel free to sort of shuffle over a bit. Or just take your chair and sit over that side.
Sit a little there.
Yeah, yeah, there's a spare chair there. Are you all right there? I'm going to pass you on to Rob now.
Okay.
Do you want something?
Yeah.
Also, if you want to shuffle, are you guys at the back okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. It's good to know that there's no shortage of work for Mendigan Road in Manchester. There's many talked to you about rural touring. Rural touring is a fantastic thing. There's about 40 schemes across the UK, and it's about taking professional performing arts to rural communities. We work in Lancashire. The spot on rural touring is work in Lancashire. We're NPO funded in partnership with Cheshire Rural Touring, but there are other schemes in Cumbria and across the whole of the north. We work very closely with the northern schemes. There's the National Rural Touring Forum. We have a website. Have a look at that. That's worth seeing. We work very closely with PANDA as well, which is great. Just to give you an indication, 85% of our audiences say that without rural touring they wouldn't go and see professional performing arts. These are audiences who live a long way from Manchester, and getting back from Manchester after a night show is nigh on impossible. So that's quite a powerful stat, really. So Spot on a Culturepedia has programmed and sometimes commissioned professional performing arts, I've got a bit of lists here, and work in village halls, church halls, pubs, churches, small village school halls, institutes, community centres, converted mills, parks, pub car parks, caravans, camper vans, a broom cupboard, derelict farms, forests, museums, libraries, mobile libraries. So there might be others to add to that list, but it's quite extensive. If it's okay with you, I'm going to talk about some of the key challenges in programming rural touring, and then I'm going to cheat a little bit and talk about two projects. So hopefully Anne-Marie won't shout at me. We work with village hall committees and volunteers who host the shows that we put on. A lot of excellent performance work that comes to us, it's touring work, nearly all touring work, doesn't even make the long list because the company haven't thought about what is and what isn't possible. For example, the show demands too much floor space, or more to the point, too much height. With the best will in the world, a pre-made 12-foot high set won't fit in a room with a 10-foot ceiling. Nothing you can do about that. Or a company's expecting a 6-hour get-in. It's like you're talking, the community centres are busy places and village halls. Quite often our spaces have got the muddle and toddlers, the brownies, the keep fit, the Weight Watchers in every week, and they can't just kick them out because the company wants to, do a get-in and then have a 4-hour rest. The piece is not being sold for our spaces or our audiences. It's hard to sell a 40-minute, one-act play without an interval. Our audiences like to make an evening of it. In addition to seeing a show, they like the social aspect. They're often friends and neighbours, because we're talking about communities coming to see a piece, and they want space to socialise as well as see some theatre. Or the technical demands are too great, as Chrissy said again. We need shows to tour with their own tech. That has to be manageable off a couple of 13-amp sockets. And it's amazing what you can do with a couple of 13-amp sockets, but you need to be able to work it out and bring it with you, but keep it simple is the answer. Our spaces don't have well-designed ranked seating. This is one of our biggest bugbears. Sidelines are an enormous issue. If you want to ride around on the floor, the audience won't see you unless they're in the front row and will miss what's going on. Or the marketing materials too specific to a limited urban audience. With the village, we need to attract everyone. We can't just target a show at 16 to 18-year-olds who are into skateboarding. You might be lucky and have 2 of them within a 10-mile radius of our villages, but they're not much of an audience. They might not even be available. Don't let all this put you off, because the rewards are amazing. I'll come to some of those later. One of the shows I'm going to just quickly talk about is Running on Air. Now, this was a show written and performed by Laura Mugridge, who's the woman there with the umbrella. This is a piece that we had about 3 years ago. For this particular show, the performer brought her own space because the performance was in the camper van. It was one-person show in the camper van. The show lasted 30 minutes for 10 people at a time, and Laura repeated it 3 or 4 times each day. This toured nationally, but we programmed it into the Newtown Square in Garstown, a car park at the Parker's Arms in Newton in Bowland, Avon Park in Preston, and Cedar Farm in Maudsley. And we sold out to each space, which was fantastic. We've explored the idea of multiple shows to small audiences a number of times since. We've had Talking Birds the Whale, and Fergus Evans's I Left My Heart Hitchhiking Down Peachtree Street, which I think is probably the only show where the title has more words in it than the audience, the number of audiences that have come with it. That was the one in Brimcoe. But this was the first that we tried. The challenges lay in explaining the concept to our audience and managing small audiences at different times and negotiating with the space holders as always, and things like power and the logistics of power and not having cables running across a car park, things like that. Laura, who's London-based, is from Fylde in Lancashire, which is great. So this, along with the fact that it was a bit different, meant that press was relatively easy to hook, because that's usually quite important to us. It's good pre-publicity. We actually ended up with a double-page spread in Lancashire Life, which is worth a hell of a lot, which is fantastic. As I said, this was an established piece of work that we've been lucky to see beforehand. So we saw it, we knew exactly what to expect, we knew what we were going to get. Most of the work that we program is new, and we're relying on recommendation or reputation and a confident company reassuring us it's going to be excellent. This was a great show. It was funny, moving, interactive, very memorable. of all the things that we promoted on Spot On, this is the thing that people come to us most and say, oh, I remember seeing that. It's almost one of those shows that people who weren't even there remember seeing it, which is great. Like I said, this was a bit of a new venture for us. We programmed it because we'd seen it. We like camper vans, we liked it. We thought it would bring new audiences to the Rural Touring Network. And usually for us, we acted as the on-the-ground promoters for this particular show. And it also enabled us to extend our profile into the summer. We normally have a spring and an autumn season, so this was something we did in the summer. So it was an interesting departure. Can you put on to the next picture? Dance Formations Northumbriana was a new piece of contemporary work that we took a bit of a risk on. This was mentored through the Rural Touring Mentoring Scheme delivered by the Northern Networks and PANDA. And dance is often a real challenge for our spaces. I've talked about sightlines. Dancers do seem to really like squirming around on the floor. That is a real challenge. Dance is often short. Selling a night out is very challenging, and dance audiences do seem hard to get for us. We really want to promote more dance, but we struggle. For some reason, people are scared of dance. You'd think with all those sort of people going to dance classes and things like that, they'd be over it. Yeah, and strip. This offered a very accessible and well-defined theme. The publicity was great. It did what it said on the tin. It explained it really well. Finding dance product that fits is hard. Like I say, we are keen to see more and develop our dance audiences. The mentoring meant we were able to get involved in the conversation early on and the creation of the work, and we were able to help mould the piece along with a company that was suitable to work in rural village halls. So conversations about sightlines, for example, potentially giving a lot more touring opportunities to the company as well, because they've got a product that has been tried and tested almost before it goes out. The show was performed in the rain, and the company took advice on sightlines and the tech requirements. The costumes and the live music were of a really high standard. And it's not often you see a dancer on point 2 feet away from you. Because rural touring is that intimate. And it was amazing. You could see the sweat and feel the emotion right up close with these dancers. The live music on Northumbrian pipes and fiddle was fantastic. The interaction between the dancers and the musician works really, really well when they're really working closely together and close to the audience. As I say, we sat in the round and the musicians sat on sort of almost like chairs the audience would have used in the round too, which was quite a high energy. One thing about dance is they find it difficult to sustain a 2-hour choreographed program. So after the set piece dance, there was an interval, and then the musicians led a ceilidh. The 3 dancers danced with us in full costume in the ceilidh with the audience, and the audience felt really privileged to be part of that show. It was an intimate encounter between the performers and the audience, which really, really worked well. Normally, if you go to a traditional theatre space, if we went to the Royal Exchange or the Lowry or to any of the black boxes that we might be talking about, you feel like you're visiting the performers. It's their space, and as an audience, you're going into that. And this chimes with what Chrissy was saying. The space belongs to the performers. But with rural touring, more than often, the space actually belongs to the audience. It's their community centre, it's their village hall, it's their village. And so the performers are the visitors. And that provides something really special. That relationship between performers and audience, something really special and intimate. A bit like those conversations Chrissy was having with people before the before the show, and that's something to really treasure, I think. We presented this particular show in 2 halls, in Barnolds, Wick and Downham. They're normal village halls. There's nothing exciting about them. You can imagine them. You can probably close your eyes and picture just the sort of village halls that they were in. and there's nothing special. There's another slide that I've got here, though, which is just quickly to talk about Village Halls. This is a different show. This is a show called Strange Face. I'm not going to talk about this. A company called Strange Face, rather. But that just sort of shows the sorts of spaces that we're working in. They nearly always have horrible flowery curtains. I don't know why Village Halls have horrible flowery curtains, but they do. You can see that this is quite near Christmas. All the Chrissy decks are up. People are sharing cups of tea. The company is set up at one end. This is an interval shot, but it just sort of gives an idea of of the intimacy and that relationship with the audience that is very, very different, but also very, very special. But the important thing about rural touring is that it's not second rate. The quality almost has to be better than, because, you know, if you haven't bothered to iron your shirt, you know, maybe if you sat on the back row in the Keys Theatre at the Lowry, you're not going to notice that on the stage, but you certainly will here. You know, if the set painting's a bit tatty, again, if you sat in the back row on the Keys Theatre at the Lowry, you're not going to notice, but you certainly will here.
Thank you. I'm not going to talk about any shows or anything. I'm going to just talk about what we do when we go into found spaces. I started out in theatre, spent many years in theatre all over the place, learnt a lot. I started taking that knowledge and going out and doing, I started in village halls and working in strange places, ended up on fishing vessels and in forests and up mountains and in cathedrals. I've been a lot of places doing a lot of things. And now I mainly do it around Manchester, which is fantastic because I don't have to travel so far. And there are lots and lots of different spaces, from small people's front rooms we've done shows in, through to 100,000 square feet warehouses and things. And there are some very simple rules, and they apply across the board. It doesn't matter where it is, it doesn't matter how big or how small it is, but there are simple facts. Take this room, for example. You've got your artistic vision, you want to do something, you're going to put it on somewhere, great. You've decided what the artistic vision and everything is. You go along, you find some spaces, you walk into them, you walk into this room, you go, brilliant, let's put it on in here. How many people can I put in my audience? How many seats can I put in here? How do I go about doing that? There's lots and lots of information. I'm not going to give you any answers to any of those questions today, because there are different ways to answer those questions. But the rules of thumb for looking at them is you can look at the square meterage of your floor, you determine how much you want for your performance space, and then you determine what's left. And then obviously you can't get more people into the space than physically there is floor space. If they're seated, they're taking up different sizes of positions. If they're all standing, they're taking up different things. Now, that said, a lot of rooms you can cram a lot of people standing into, and that is overcapacitating them. Well, the actual room that we usually take it from isn't about the floor size, it's about the amount of doors going in and out, and the width of the doors. And that is managed by the fire officer. He will determine whether or not your venue is suitable for the amount of people that you will tell him you're going to put into that. And all of this information that you start pulling together when you start looking at a space, as Trish did when they look round, you pull together into, and the common methodology for doing this is to pull it together into an event plan, as we call it. It's the standard procedure that works for everybody that isn't in the theatrical or the entertainment side of this. And there's a very good, although nobody likes doing it, there's a very good rationale for it, okay? Your event plan is your way of telling the rest of the world, the people who don't want to come to your event or care about your event, what is happening, so that if there's an issue, they can come along and help you work it out and resolve it. And I'm talking about the fire, the police, the environmental health, licensing, all of those people, and the HSE as well. And they're the last people you ever want to talk to, I believe you me. And all of these people have rule books. They're as thick as anything. And they have a rule and a regulation for everything. And that rule will say, your chairs have to be this size, they have to be this long in a row, you can only go to 32 without any aisles. You've got to have your doorways this way, you've got to have your staircases. And they have more rules than you will ever need to learn or worry about. But you need to be able to have a good understanding if you're setting up in a temporary venue of what those rules are, so that you can then put down in your event plan, in writing, how you're going to approach doing your event. And that then, as a document, you will then send off to the licensing department, because you don't know all the people you need to send it to. The licensing department will take it from you. They will disseminate it to all the people that should know about it. Okay? And as much as you think I'm doing a show in a house with 20 people in it, and why do the police need to know about that? The police might need to know about that because actually they might have a car accident down the road. They might divert the buses past that route all the way on that day because that's the easiest way to do it, and suddenly there are going to be 20 people coming out on a very small road that might cause an issue for them. Okay? If they know about this in advance and it goes into their daily briefing notes as part of all the things that are going on that you never know about behind the scenes, they will probably do a different diversion route on that day if there's going to be the accident. It's all this other bit of the picture that you don't see that has a knock-on effect to everything. And the thing that happens is your event benefits from all of these things. So everybody seems to have a big issue with licensing and that it's a dark art and everything. The people are there to help you. There's a lot of information on the websites, and just to be clear, it is differentiated by council areas. So what you might find in Manchester may not necessarily be the same in other areas in different councils. So if you are touring around, for instance, you might be doing a certain practice, you might have a certain type of fire effect that you use on stage, and some councils will have a different opinion of how that's looked after and managed. But you let them know in your event plan, if you're touring it, what is going to be happening, or you talk to the venue beforehand and let them know that you're bringing that. They will then just talk to their licensing. If you've got documentation on it and you provide it, they read the documentation, understand what's going on, and can either say, we're happy with that or we're not happy with that. If they haven't got the documentation, they don't know what's going on, they're not going to make up ideas of what it is because they only work in the rule book. Does it quantify to any of these rules? If you've given them the information as good as you have it and what you know, then they can at least assess that and give you an answer. They will never give you a, yes, you can do that because it's safe. If you want an answer, you have to impart the information to them of, I believe it's safe because we're doing this, this and this. So if we come into this room, we sit down, we've worked out how wide the doors are, where the emergency exits are, how many seats we can get in, we've worked all that through. Do we know if the building is safe? Do we know if the ceiling's going to fall down? Do we know if those lights are going to just drop out of the air? Do we know if the floor is going to all pop up and we're going to fall over? All of those things need a rough assessment. This is a new building. These have been installed by professional people. It is more than likely going to be safe. If we're going into an old building, we can't guarantee the safety of the roof. And this is where things really start getting a little bit tricky. Because the simple answer to that is that, for most people, is that you then find that somebody will come along and say, well, I can do an assessment of your roof and it will cost you £20,000. And you've got 300 quid budget for the show. It's a very difficult juggling act, this. We have this problem all the time when we go into buildings, you know. And it's 90% of them, the only issues that we find are ceilings. There's been a very famous incident recently in the West End, unfortunately, where a large piece of plaster came down. the one thing that nobody should ever have to happen is that somebody gets hurt coming to an event, whatever size or scale or anything. You want your audience to come along, you want them to enjoy it, experience it, see it, be part of it, and then to go away hopefully feeling happy. But if you want them to feel other things, then that's up to you and how you create your experience. So putting them into harm's way is one of the worst things you can do. Overcapacitating because you feel that, oh, I can just squeeze a bit more in here, there and everywhere. It's only when things go wrong that it becomes apparent that you really shouldn't have done that, and then it's too late. So working it all out on a piece of paper beforehand, sending it off to people so that they look at it, and they will look at it and go, okay, we agree, that amount of seats with those aisles, and they want to know the measurements of things because everything's done to measurements. So all of this you can find, there's people like the Association of British Theatre Technicians, the ABTT, online. They have a yellow book. I use the yellow book. The fire officer, funnily enough, doesn't. And in the yellow book, I've got regulations that he goes, well, no, that's not right. And I go, well, it's in my book. I'm sticking to this. I can make that work. I feel that's safe. We have a conversation. And 9 times out of 10, they'll go, actually, yes, okay, so you're going to have somebody marshalling that area, for instance. I'll agree that you can do that, and that's fine. I'm not going to stop that. They're not here to stop us. They're not here to ruin the fun. They're here to make sure that everybody goes home safely at the end of the night. And that's the rationale for doing all of this. It's not to annoy you. It's not to make it cost more money. I agree that 9 times out of 10, it does cost some money. But you are getting all of the information that you're doing out to people, and they are assessing it, and they're letting you know that they think that what you're trying to do is correct. And if they see something they're not happy with, they'll come back and talk to you about it. That it shouldn't be a, no, stop, you're not allowed to do it. It should be a, we're not happy with this scenario, what can you do in order to make sure that you make me aware that that is a safe way of producing this, of creating this, of doing this. You know, we all know there are chainsaw jugglers out there still. You know, there are shows with massive pyrotechnics and things. You take a Park Life festival that happens in Manchester, you get 70,000 people in one space. That's a lot of people, but Old Trafford do that every other week. You know, they've got a methodology over there that again is about that thing, and just happens like that because it's the same thing every week. It's not hard. It's just it's planned out strategically well, done properly. Have I run out? Sorry.
Thank you.
Just to say, there's lots of things you can find out about this online. There's the purple guide out there, which I'm fortunate that they've just changed, so you have to purchase it. If you're lucky enough, get the Mark 1 purple guide. You can download it for free as a PDF. ABTT, Plaza, associations have got information for this online, and they've got little help centres and things.
Thank you. What is the most challenging thing that you've ever had to try and sort?
Live animals is actually one of the most challenging, dangerous live animals in live events. It was the bull, yeah. That went a long way, that did. That went a long, long way. We had a lot of sleepless nights. Just briefly on it, I came up with all this methodology to get a bull on the stage live, and nobody wanted us to do it, basically, is the actual fact of the matter. It wasn't. They came up with all these regulations about the shear loading of us restraining it within the building. We pulled the back wall down if the bull had charged and all the rest of it. And I went to one of my suppliers, and I was at my wit's end, and I went to AJ down at Unusual. Mate, this is just ridiculous. We're being censored from doing something for no apparent reason. This bull, it's hand-reared. The bloke looking after it with 2 other guys behind it, and a bloke on the side stage with a blow dart who's a registered vet, will, as Digby said, if it becomes a problem, I'll wrestle it to the floor.
That would have been
We went through all of this. We set all of this up. I had my wardrobe mistress make a harness for a bull, and nobody ever asked me to test it.
Oh.
I had a second one made, which I sent for test to be destructed, but it was tested 2 weeks after we finished the show. But I knew in my mind that nobody was going to get hurt because the audience had the orchestra pit. The reason I had to restrain it was not because of because we cleared the orchestra pit, and if the bull fell in the orchestra pit, it was for the safety of the bull that we restrained the bull. But that was the hardest thing. It was
Sorry, what was the show?
It was called Il Tempo del Postino in the Opera House for the first festival that we did here.
Because I remember, was it that they used the bull, but then they didn't? I remember watching it, but there was something about it did happen and then it didn't.
It didn't deliver it.
It did
to the
Oh,
brain.
that's what it was. I knew
Yeah.
there was some.
And we got into a lot of legislation about tickling bulls and things.
Yeah.
But I think we'll leave it at that.
Can I just ask quite quickly so that we can keep to time, but I'd just really like to know what from each of you you really get from this type of work, because it's got its headaches obviously, but what are the rewards and what's the difference between just doing something in a black box where you've got all the lights you could ever want in this team?
I think for me, I really like work that I can't fall asleep in. And that's not about me being really active and running around all the time. It's about, it has to either be very engaging or get me to do something. I don't want to fall asleep. And I think if you take people out of theatre, even if they're sat down and you create a theatre, there's a different experience there, I think. You're not allowed to fall asleep. So I think it's about engagement for me. Our audience, 2/3 of them go to normal theatre. Quite a lot of them, I think about half, we did a little bit of research, and it was about half, 60% play video games. So that's their reference point for our work. They don't come from the theatre to see our work. So you engage a whole new audience just by getting out of the building and doing it somewhere else.
Anything else?
Well, for me personally, I just quite like the challenge of breaking out of my personal comfort zone, which is black box theatre, just because it's new to me. It's a new experiment for me to be going out to communities. And I quite like, although it's difficult working in these spaces because of the tech or the lack of tech, for me it's quite liberating because I will end up having more control as opposed to creating a lighting design for somebody else to operate and rig and program. I quite like the idea of I've just got it in a suitcase that I can just carry myself, and I know what it is, where it's set up, and I operate it myself from the stage. I don't tour with a technician and hope that they get the cues right. I quite like having that responsibility and that control of it. It's just me, and I'm just figuring it out. And although it's challenging in some ways, it is easier as well, because once you know what that is, you've got it all figured out, and perhaps there is less chance of it going wrong because you've made sure that it can just work wherever you go. I've had lots of problems with touring black box work, of going to a space and the theatre saying, oh, you can't put sugar on this floor, or you can't. Well, that's the show. You've got the tech spec in advance, and you just kind of presume once you get to a theatre that everything will be okay, and it not always is. So this, with community centres or those kinds of places, it's like you're prepared for all the questions, and you've already kind of figured out what you're going to do about that. So it's there's less surprises in some respects.
I think it's the intimacy that you get with all touring in non-traditional spaces. You go into a traditional theatre, and you sort of sit in that, you get sort of cocooned in that nice sort of folding seat, and it detaches you from, because I strongly believe that theatre's a verb, not a noun, and I think that's this is about some of the best theatre that I've seen has not been in a building with theatre written over the door. And I think it's safe to say that because I've usually been more involved. And I think it's the communication between the audience and the think it's the ownership of the space being with the audience, not the performers. And even if with things like Running on Air, which was not, which was, I mean, the performer definitely owned the space, it was a camper van, but that there was a real intimacy and engagement. I think that's what's really special.
I actually think the audiences really enjoy it. You know, there's a lot of stuff that we do where we're just thinking about the shows, but actually I do spend a lot of time now thinking about audiences, which is what I didn't used to do. And I really think that audiences, even if it's outdoors in a wet forest somewhere, you know, especially at night in the winter time, nobody goes out in forests at winter time at night. Why would you? It's pitch black and there's nothing to see. But actually, if you do, you know, a 6-mile walk through a forest that's all lit up, it's amazing. And the number of people that go and do that, who go, I've never even come up here, even when it's summer and it's nice, you know, they love it. They like going to somewhere that they haven't been before. And that's a really great thing for them. You just need to make sure they go home without twisting their
Right, I'd like you to do a little bit of work now. You've all got a colour. If you haven't, then Sue's going to give you one. I just want you to get into 3s or 4s, but you have to be the same colour. And just sit at a table and have a chat with the people that you're with about their experience, because there's a lot of experience in the room as well of this type of work. But what I'd like you to do is, by 3 o'clock, we want at least one key question that you want to, or a challenge that you find working in this kind of field that we're going to put back to the panel. Okay, so you've got till 3. At 3 o'clock, give in your question and you can have a break. Okay.
Do we give it verbally or written down?
It'll be written down. You've got post-it notes on the tables. So just, you can write lots of questions and then at the end pick which ones you want to...
Well, that's it. Goodbye now.
Okay.